District Council's Making a Difference Grants Fund that is about to be launched the week after next. That's what we're hoping in terms of timescale. So it's very timely to be able to come today and talk to you about the programme. It is only open to organisations that are based or work with communities in Hambleton. So I'll just say that right at the start, just to sort of set the scene in terms of who it's available for. So if you can just move on to the first slide for me. So what I'm going to run through in the next half an hour is just around what the programme's about, what the eligibility criteria is for it, what we are looking for in terms of the projects that we want to fund and how we assess those. And then at the end, I've just got some top tips. So we've been running this programme now for a number of years, and there are some common, not mistakes, but things that people do that sort of happen year in, year out. So I thought if I just cover some of the top tips at the end, that'll help if you are going to make an application when you get to that stage. And then, as Bridget's explained, we'll open it up to questions. Ideally, I'd like to keep the questions as generic as possible, you know, so that they're of interest to everybody rather than the sort of detailed specific questions around projects. But I will share my contact details at the end, and we can have a conversation outside this meeting about your sort of specific projects if that would be welcome. So the programme has been set up by Hambleton District Council. It's a big priority for our elected members. What's probably unique about this for a lot of grants programmes is that the ward members are actually the people that make the decisions. So we'll present information that's come in, but the sort of door stops with the ward members. So one of the things that we ask for with applications is that you have a ward member support. So whoever your local district councillor for your area is, that they would need to sort of support the application and put their name to it. And that's really important. I think we have a number of applications that come in and they've just had a quick conversation with the ward member. They said, yeah, put my name on it, but they don't really know much about the project. And I think if you can sort of get a meeting or a telephone conversation with your ward member to discuss your projects right at the start of the process, just so they've got a real clear understanding of what the project is, it really helps when it goes to panel, because they'll be advocating your project along with their colleagues. So the fund is that the total amount in the fund's £250,000 this year. It was doubled last year, so it was previously 125,000, but because the members like this, they've doubled the funds, so there's £250,000 in the pot. The way that the fund is split is into 5 sub areas. So those 5 areas are based around the 5 market towns in Hambleton. So there's a Bedale panel, Easingwold, North Allerton, Stokesley and Thirsk. So all the ward members for that particular sub area sit on a panel, and they'll assess all the applications and make their decisions. So that's 250k split into 5 areas. So each sub area's got a budget of £25,000 to allocate. So in the world of funding, it's not the biggest fund that there is, and different panels decide on, you know, how they want to split that. So some areas want to give, you know, a little bit to everybody, and others, you know, might pick 3 or 4 projects that they want to fund. But I'll go on to some sort of top tips around the level of requests that you're asking for. That's not right, is it? 250,000 divided by 5 is not 25,000. It's 50,000. Oh, made a faux pas right at the start there. Sorry about that. So the sub area fund is £50,000. It was previously 25,000 when we had a smaller pot. So apologies for that. So those ward members will assess the applications, and they'll allocate the 50k to the projects that best meet the criteria. The fund is also just a 1-year time frame to deliver, so they tend not to want to fund salaries particularly because of the sustainability issue with that, because we can only commit to 1 year. So a lot of the projects tend to be project specific, capital purchases, that sort of thing. But I'll sort of cover what sorts of things we will fund. We'll move on to the next slide, please. So in terms of who's eligible to apply, it's not-for-profit groups and organisations, charities, voluntary groups, and it does include parish councils. As part of the application process, you will be asked to provide your organisation's constitution and confirm that you've got a bank account. So that's the sort of 3 key things we're looking for: not-for-profit group that's constituted and has its own bank account. And then the other criteria is that the services that you're delivering or the project that you're wanting to develop benefits the residents of Hambleton. So we've had ones in the past where the organisation isn't based in Hambleton, but the service that they're delivering is. So we've accepted that. At the end of the day, this is about making a difference to the residents of Hambleton. Okay, move on. In terms of organisations or people that are excluded from the programme, so we won't fund statutory organisations. So again, we've had schools, for example, that have asked if they can apply. We can't fund them, but we could fund the Friends of, if they've got a Friends of arm that's a sort of charitable organisation that sort of raises money to the school. So we could fund them, but we couldn't actually fund the school themselves. We don't fund individuals, we don't fund businesses, and we don't fund organisations that seek to promote political or religious extremism or radicalisation. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit now about the sorts of things that we can fund. There's a lovely picture there. That's one of our grant recipients. That's a community shop in East Cowton. And we helped them set that community shop up that they'd previously lost. So that was the purchase of a porter cabin, I think it was, and then fitted out as a shop. And that's the local ward member there with a tray of pork pies in his hand. So that's just an example of one of the projects that we funded previously. So if you just move on to the next slide. So as I've mentioned, the sort of driving force for this fund is to tackle identified needs that are going to make a real difference in the community. So what we always try and get across to groups is for the group to think about what it is that they're trying to tackle. What's the problem? What's the issue as you sort of starter for 10? So it could be that you've got an elderly sector within the village and there's people that are isolated within that community. So that would be a starting point. That's the issue that your project's trying to tackle. Because it's a council-run scheme, the project must meet one of our key priorities, but they are very broad. I'd be hard pressed to think of a project that wouldn't fit under one of these, but our 4 council priorities are around economic vitality, health and well-being, caring for the environment, or providing a special place to live. Now you can find out more about those on our website in our council plan if you want to dig a little bit deeper in terms of those categories, but they are quite broad ranging, and I would, as I said, it'd be very unusual to find a project that wouldn't hit at least one of those criteria. And on the application form, it's just a tick box to say which ones is your project going to hit. You don't score more points if you hit 4 than an application that only hits 1. So don't feel that you need to try and sort of shoehorn your project to meet all 4. We don't have a scoring system where you score more points if and we find that some people just tick all 4, and actually when you read what the project is, that's not the case. So that sort of might get changed later down the application process. And as I said before, you must complete the project within 1 year. Now, this is really important, particularly for this round of funding, because we're moving into local government reorganisation. So in previous years, we have had the flexibility to extend a grant into another financial year, but because of local government reorganisation, that will not be happening. You know, there won't be the opportunity to do that. So again, when you're thinking about your project, think about, you know, in terms of being realistic about it, could it be completed within that financial year? We're hoping to launch, as I said, the programme in October. The deadline for applications will be before Christmas, so we have time to assess the applications, take them to panel, and then the recommendations will go to our council's cabinet meeting in March. So we'll be looking at projects starting from April 2022 and to be finished no later than March 2023. Otherwise, you know, the grant will disappear. Okay, move on, thank you. So as I mentioned at the start and got wrong, that the panels have £50,000 each to allocate. The grants that we give out are between £2,000 and £25,000. So we can't fund any grants that are looking for less than £2,000. The panel could, if they wanted to, award up to £25,000 for one project, but to date that hasn't happened. So although there is, you know, we say you can apply up to £25,000, realistically, you know, thinking about previous panels, they've never gone that high with one project. I think the most one panel's allocated to a project was £18,000, but they had quite a small number of projects that they were looking at that year. The project can be revenue and or capital. As I said, they'll only fund salaries in exceptional circumstances. And in the last round of funding, I think there was only one project that they felt was exceptional enough to fund at a post. Generally, you know, it's not something that they will fund, but you know, you can apply for it if you make your case really well and you know it's deemed exceptional by the panel, then you know that they could fund it. Generally, the projects that we fund tend to be small capital works to a building or purchases of equipment, printing, training, website development, that sort of thing, you know, has been funded in the past. The other thing with our grants, we can only fund up to 75% of the total project costs. So this is again something where applicants have misread that in the past. So we can't fund a project 100%. You would need to find the other 25% from elsewhere. In terms of that, so we can't go over 75%. It just, you know, if you've got 50% of the funding, you know, we can fund 50%, but as I say, we can't go over a 75% contribution. So again, realistically, you just need to think about that. Have you got your match funding in place? If you haven't, is that likely to come to fruition within the financial year that the grant will be available? Move on, please. So within the application, there's a section on outcomes. So one of the questions asks about identifying number of beneficiaries. So again, you need to think about that. Again, make sure it's realistic. In my top tips, I sort of cover this in a little bit more detail around number of beneficiaries. But we've had ones where, you know, it'll come in, so play equipment, for example, in a village, and the number of beneficiaries have been put every single resident in the village. Well, realistically, not every single resident is going to benefit from that play equipment. Within the sort of application form, people have put, well, you know, it's open access, anyone can use it, therefore, you know, everybody from that village could benefit from it. But really, you know, in terms of play equipment, you're not going to get every single member of a village using it. So just think realistically about your numbers of beneficiaries. We also ask for you to identify the types of beneficiaries. So are they young people? Are they women and girls? Are they men? Are they people with disabilities? We're just trying to get some sort of categorization of the types of people that are going to benefit if it is specific to one beneficiary. If it's open to all, then that's fine. You know, you can put that in there. But we are interested in seeing who the people are that are going to be targeted for the project. And then we ask applicants to identify 3 outcomes. So this is what we use for our monitoring and evaluation. You will identify 3 outcomes that your project is going to deliver. And then when we, as part of the application process, if you've been successful, you'll be asked to do a monitoring form once you've claimed the grant. And within that monitoring form, we'll go back to those 3 outcomes so you can report back on how well you've done in terms of achieving those. So again, you know, your outcomes need to be measurable. If I go back to my earlier example of the village with the isolated older people in the community, you know, you need to think about what's the outcomes of the project. So if you're going to set up a luncheon club, it could be one of your outcomes is that you're going to support or provide lunches for 20 of those residents. Another outcome could be that those residents, because they're coming to the luncheon club, feel less isolated. So again, you need to think about how you're going to measure that. Do you ask them some questions at the start of the project and then revisit those a few months into the project to see if anything's changed? So again, it's just thinking about what are the 3 key outcomes and how you're going to measure them, and then obviously reporting back to us at the end of the year. Next slide, please. Right, so these are my top tips. So the first one, and this is probably the most important one, is to read the guidance notes. So when the fund is launched, there'll be information on our website, there'll be the application form, but alongside that, there's some guidance notes. I can't stress enough how important it is to read those, because it just sets out exactly what it is that we're looking for. The application is available as an online form, and it's also available as a paper form, but you must complete all the sections of the application. Every year we get ones that have come back that haven't been completed, or they've put, you know, next to no information against some of the questions. To make a really strong application, you need to complete all the sections. I actually think the online form now forces you to put something in each of the sections, so it's not as easy to miss. But if you're filling out a paper copy, again, you must fill out all the sections within there. As I said before, you have to submit the constitution and accounts. Now, again, there's some organisations where that's not possible. So, for example, parish councils tend not to have a constitution. I know some of them do, but others don't. But we're aware that that's the case with parish councils. So there will be a little tick box to say that you don't have one, and you know, we'd accept that for a parish council. The other 2 groups that can fall into this category are churches. They tend to have a very complicated setup in terms of how they're constituted. So a lot of them don't have their own constituted. They'll be linked to some, you know, the sort of diocese for that area. What I would say, if you've got any, you know, if you come from any of those types of organisations that don't have a constitution, just get on the phone to us, talk it through. We'll get around that. And the other group are Scouts. They tend to be linked into that. They have their own sort of, I can't even think what it is now, their constitution, but I know we've had issues in the past with Scouts groups not being able to provide a constitution. But as I say, we're a friendly bunch, just pick up the phone and talk that through with us. So we asked to see your constitution if you've got one, and then your accounts. So we'll ask for the previous year's accounts, and on the form, I think it asks for you just to provide data from your last 2 sets of accounts. And the reason for that is we need to check that the organisations that we're funding are solvent and financially viable, and we do that by assessing your accounts. And then it sort of moves on in terms of gaining the support from your local ward member. So I've mentioned there that that's really important, and rather than just sort of ring up and give them a sort of pitted version of what the project is, I think you'd find it really beneficial to sort of speak to the ward member and explain in detail what your project is, just so that they get on board with it. As I say, when they're at the panel meetings, you can tell the ones where they've had more involvement in the projects because they can talk about it more, they get sort of more animated and enthusiastic about it. So I think that's a really good tip, to have those conversations with your local ward members. If you don't know who they are, their details are on our website, or again, you can just pick up the phone and ask one of the team. Thank you. Move on. So in terms of your cost plan, I would recommend that you sort of thoroughly research the costs and that they're accurate. Year after year, we get people that haven't done that research, and then it gets really complicated if a grant's been awarded and then the costs change significantly and we have to do sort of grant payment changes. So I would just take the time. I mean, hopefully, if we get the programme launched in the next couple of weeks, you should have a 10-week window to submit the application. So get online, go and talk to suppliers, etc., in terms of what it is that you're wanting to deliver, to try and get your costs as accurate as possible. We don't actually ask for any evidence, particularly, you don't have to send in quotes or anything with your application form, but I would recommend getting those so you've got them in hand, and then if your bid's successful, you know that what the money that you're asking for is in the right ballpark. One of the criteria that the panel look at is value for money. And it's not an exact science, but they will look at number of beneficiaries and the amount of money that's being asked for to see if that is value for money. Obviously, that varies, depending on the project. Some beneficiaries, the cost may be higher to support a small number of beneficiaries because of what you're wanting to do. So it's not an exact science. There's no sort of calculation to assess value for money, but that is something that the panel members will look at. If people are asking for a £20,000 grant and it's only going to benefit 5 people in the community, when actually that money, if you did the project in a different way, would benefit more people. So that's one of the criteria that they look at. And also, as I mentioned, the realistic match funding. So again, if you've got funding in the bank already, great, because that's there. That's easy. But if you're looking at applying to other grants to match fund your projects, look at the time scales of that funders. Is it going to fit with the project and the time frame for this? Another thing where people have had issues is where they've not got all the permissions required to deliver the project. So there is a question there, and it is just a tick box. So it's very easy to just tick it and say, yes, we've got all the permissions. And then as you get further down the line, realize that you haven't. So things like if you're doing work to a building and it's leased, have you got permission from your landlord to do the project that it is that you're wanting to deliver? Does the project require planning permission? And again, that's not a quick process. So if you haven't got planning permission and that's required, are you going to secure that within the time frames that you're looking at? We're just dealing with one at the moment that didn't get the permissions in place from the landlord, and now it's delaying the project. So, it can have a significant impact on project delivery if you haven't got all those permissions in place. Mentioned before about the realistic number of beneficiaries. Don't think I need to go into that in any more detail. And you might think that's a mistake that I've read the guidance notes again, but that isn't a mistake. I just wanted to go back to that because that, I think, if you can take the time to read through those, it'll really help you when you're writing your application, to make sure you cover all the points that we're looking for. So we're just working on the documentation at the moment. We're looking, the last conversation I had with a colleague that's working on this, we're looking at week commencing the 11th of October to launch. If you are interested in applying, you can get in touch with us now and we can put you on our distribution list, so you'll get an email to say once everything's up and running on the website. Otherwise, if you just keep an eye on our website for that, there'll be information going out on social media and there'll be a press release. But I'm quite happy to take contact details to go on our list of people that we will automatically notify once everything's available. The deadline for submissions, I put mid-December there. It is now looking like it'll probably be the first week in December. And that might seem a sort of long gap before it goes to cabinet, but we have to assess all the applications that come in. In previous years, we've had between 50 to 75 applications come in. So there's quite a lot of stuff to go through. And again, if there's bits missing or attachments haven't been sent, there's quite a lot of follow-up to do before we can present the information to our panels. Throughout January, the panels will then meet, they'll make their recommendations, and then I have to write the cabinet report at the beginning of February, so it can be looked at the March meeting. So that's why it seems quite a long time, but that's the way it's done. So it'll go to cabinet in March, and then there's a standstill period which we have to wait for in case anything gets called in, and then once that date's passed, then we can send out letters to everybody to say whether they've been successful or not. As I said there, the projects can only start from April onwards, so the budget is set to, in that sort of fiscal year, so we can't have any projects starting to be delivered before the start of April. So again, this is where I've actually dealt with one today. They've sent the claim in with their evidence of expenditure, and 2 of the invoices were dated before they'd even got the grant, so we can't fund things in retrospect. So just make a plea today that don't spend anything to do with the project delivery until after the 1st of April. Otherwise the expenditure would be ineligible. And then, as I said, you've got till March 2023 to deliver the project. And I've just stuck that in there, but I mentioned before that there will definitely be no opportunities for an extension this time. And I think that's it. So there's that's a public realm project that we funded. So that was in West Tanfield, I think. The parish council wanted to put some new steps in that made the site more accessible. And there again, we've got one of our elected members with the project lead showing off their new steps. So questions?
Thanks, Lisa. That was a great presentation. If there's anything Lisa hasn't covered, or if anyone's got any questions, you just want to put your hand up. There's only a few of us, so you could just unmute if you like.
I saw there was some things in chat, but I couldn't do that and read them at the same time.
I think it was just Chris Riley saying thanks for all the info. I've got to
he's going. Right, okay.
the list when the launch happens. Does anybody have any questions? I've got some that was sent in advance. Doreen, do you want to unmute and ask your question? If you just unmute in the bottom left of your screen, there should be a little button that says mute. If you just click on that.
You might have to hover your cursor, then it'll pop up.
Yeah, and it'll just show up.
There you go.
All right, there we go, yeah. We're hoping to do quite a big project really with refurbishing our village hall and changing rooms for cricket, etc. Would the grant cover costs such as an architect to redesign the village hall and perhaps an energy survey to see if we're eligible for solar panels and things like that?
Yes, it would. Yeah. And what I would say with big projects, because this is quite a small fund, you might want to just look at a discrete element of what that project is. So rather
Yeah,
than
so
say, oh, we want 50, it's a £50,000 project, we want 25,000, you might want to focus. So energy efficiency might be the project that you look at. And that, so, you could pay for the survey out of that. The only thing is with that, you maybe wouldn't know what your costs were, because you'd need to get the survey done to see what would be required, and then do you see what I mean? So it's a bit
chicken and egg, isn't it?
chicken and egg, that one, yeah. But what you could do is just get some, just talk to a company and say, could you just have some sort of informal advice in terms of what you could do, and then that might help you sort of determine some of the costs that.
And if you apply for it this coming year, would that preclude you from applying for it in future years?
I can't say about future years, just because we're not going to exist in future years, Hambleton District Council. So no, it wouldn't end like in previous years. It's not precluded people coming back each year for a grant. I mean, the other thing there, if you've got some ideas, we could also look at other grants that you could, I'm just thinking time-wise now, if you knew how much an energy survey was going to cost you, we could maybe look at grants that are available now to get that done, and then that would then inform an application for this project. But I'm happy to talk to you outside this meeting if you want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'll share I'll put my contact details in the chat, and then you can get in touch with me. So I'll stick my email address in there.
Thank you.
And my phone number.
Thanks, Doreen. Does anyone else have a question? No, quite a small group, aren't we? Have you got one, Ian? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one quick one. How do you, I'm linking this to a previous seminar, how do you look at reserves when you're looking at this particular grant?
We do look at reserves. The sort of rule of thumb is if you've got over 1 year's running costs in reserves, that gets flagged up at the panel. What I would say is if you've got a lot of reserves, so some organisations have a lot of reserves because it's there for a project. So if that does apply to your organisation, if you just mention that somewhere within your application form, we'd pick that up. The other thing that we don't take into account is restricted funding. So if funding is restricted, we don't class that as free reserves. So if you've got funding that's been given to you for a specific purpose, we don't take that into account.
Ah, okay. Okay, we've never had reserves before, by the way, but we've
have you got reserves now?
We've managed to get some, bizarrely. So
which organisation?
It's the Hutton Rugby hub.
All right. Yes. All right.
So we've managed to get some this year. Although we haven't quite agreed it yet, but.
But yeah, if there's anything like that that you just want to flag up, you can flag that up. I don't think there's a particular question on the application form about reserves. So just, in your project description, you could just put a paragraph in there if you need to explain anything about your reserves that would be helpful to us.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Does anybody else have a question? David, go ahead. Sorry, David, you're on mute at that stage.
All right, yeah, okay. I'm chairman of the Bowls Club in as well as being a town council, but I'm the chairman of the Bowls Club in Stokes at the sports club.
Yeah.
We've got a very small membership there of about 30 people. And we need to do some repairs to the bowling green. What you mentioned about the number of beneficiaries and what the sort of cost effectiveness of it. If we've got 30 members and we have a little project, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean that sounds fine to me. you know, in terms of the club. And what you could do to strengthen your application is just talk about how this project may increase that membership. You know, if you get better facilities, or, you know, a better playing surface, or, you know, you could sort of mention there, you know, on the back of this, we're going to have a bit of an event that, you know, like an open day or something, that to attract new members. Our members love things like that, you know, if it's going to increase membership. But 30, you know, 30 is, you know, for a bowling club's quite a decent amount of people, I would say.
Yeah, well, we've suffered in the last couple of years because our fundraising, as like everybody else's, I guess, has suffered because we just haven't been able to get our things like the domino drives and things like that.
Yeah.
So it just couldn't happen.
Yeah. So things that would strengthen your application would be, you know, just to talk about how that investment may increase membership, but also talk about the benefits that those 30 people get from being part of your club.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of physical activity, social interaction with, you know, those sorts of, they're sort of buzzwords that would strengthen an application. And I you know, I don't know what your costs are. You maybe haven't got that far yet, but no, it seems reasonable to me.
Well, it would be probably about £4,000 or £5,000.
Yeah, no, that seems reasonable. You just need to get onto one of your elected members and maybe just sort of talk through the project with them, and then that will also help.
Yeah, will do. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, David. I've got some questions, unless anyone else has got one that was sent in advance, but I think most of them you covered in your presentation, Lisa. Is there anything else? I know you picked up on this in your presentation, but is there anything else that you could say around regards to evidence of need for a project that you'd want to see in an application?
Yes, so I think the main one's identifying what the issue is. So, you know, if you think, oh, because quite often we get, you know, people, oh, we want to do this, and then they don't really know why. So it's always really good to describe what the problem is. So David's example that is given there, the playing surface. So that, you know, the problem there is that people aren't being able, you know, can't bowl properly on there, and, you know, the bowling clubs are sort of a key thing for the membership there. So it's just about thinking, right, you know, what is the problem? And if that bowling green continues to deteriorate, you know, you've got a real problem then, because A, it becomes very expensive to you know, to do that work, or B, the club might fold because of that, and then you've lost that sort of community project. So start with the problem, and then describe how the grant and the project is going to meet that need. The other thing is, in terms of evidence, we'd want to see how you know that. So David's example there is very clear, because it's, you know, you can see that problem. For other things, you know, if you're wanting to, I don't know, tackle antisocial behaviour, so you want to do some work in a local park that's going to make it safer and reduce antisocial behaviour, as your evidence of need there, you could talk about antisocial behaviour that's been reported to the police, or you could talk about complaints that you're getting from residents, or you could get evidence from people, you know, parents in the area that have sort of said that the children don't feel safe in that. So that's sort of building up your sort of evidence in terms of what the problem is. The other thing we've used in the past as evidence, if you've got a parish plan, that's a really good point. You know, if you can point us, you know, to a plan that's been done previously that's identified the issue. And again, as I say, surveys, questionnaires, that sort of thing might help you strengthen your sort of argument in terms of evidence of need.
That's great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
The other thing that is, you know, can be useful to some applications, depending on what the project is sort of demographical evidence. You know, if you can get statistics for the area or the types of beneficiaries that you're looking at. You know, if it's a deprived area, there's an index of local deprivation that you could refer to in your application. If you're in an area where there's a been a big increase in housing development. You can make reference to the local plan, you know, because they say, oh, you know, there's 500 new houses being built in our town, and that's putting extra pressure on services, etc. So there's lots of ways that you can demonstrate need. You just need to sort of think about what it is that you're trying to evidence.
That's great. That's really helpful. Just let me look through the questions. I don't know if you've already mentioned this, but what's the average size of grant that you make, and are you likely to be more successful if you ask for less funding?
No, that's a good point. I didn't mention that. The average size of grants around the 5k mark. A lot of the grants are sort of 2.5 to 3,000, but I'd say the average is 5. They very rarely go over 10. I can probably count on one hand the number of grants that have been awarded over 10,000. So you're probably looking between sort of 3 to 7.5, maybe. And I think that point that I made to Doreen is, you know, if it's part of a bigger project, maybe just focus on one element of it for this fund, and come and talk to us about funding, because we're not the only funders in town, so to speak. We can do funding searches and provide you with a report of other grants that are available out there that you know, you could put together as a funding package for the whole project. But discrete elements of big projects would be most appropriate, I think, for this fund.
Thank you, that's helpful. And are you happy?
Can I ask a really daft question?
Yeah,
There's never a daft question.
When you're talking about funding levels, how do I say this? Do you apply for more than you need and then expect to get? Do you follow me?
Don't know if I can answer that question.
Is there a negotiation involved?
What tends to happen at panels, if there's a desire to fund the project but there's not enough money in the pot, the panel members will look at what's in the sort of project plan in terms of the budget. So in the past, they've sort of said, right, we want to fund this project. We can't afford to fund all of it, so we're just going to fund this element of it. So it might be a play area where there's, you know, they've got this grand plan, there's 5 bits of kit that they want to put in. They've broken that down in the budget, so the panel members can see how it's sort of carved up, and then they said, actually, rather than give them nothing, we'll give them funding for one piece of equipment. Or we've had one where a sports club were wanting to do various different things with their building. Again, they couldn't afford to fund it all, but they picked 1 or 2 of the elements, said, we think these will make the most difference to the community and we'll fund these elements.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking that is that you've got 1 year to spend the money.
Yeah.
If you get a shortfall of what you're asking for, then you've got to get it from, you know, the difference from other means. So that could affect the actual expenditure in the first place.
Yeah, and one of the things that we try and get across to our panel members is that exact point. So we've had them in the past saying, you know, someone's asked for £10,000. Well, they didn't have enough in the budget. Oh, we're going to give them £1,000. And then I'll be like, but is that project going to be delivered? You know, could that be delivered? Because, you know, they need 10 and you're giving them 1. So we do have that conversation with panel members to say, actually, by doing that, is the project still viable? Because sometimes it's not. What it might be worth doing, Ian, is us having a conversation about your projects outside the meeting and see what's best for it, because it might be that making a difference isn't right for your project, and, you know, we can look at other funding streams, and we're happy to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any kind of priority groups or projects that you'll be funding, Lisa?
No, we don't specify to that amount of you know, that level of detail, really. I know that other funders, you know, have specific things that they're looking to fund. The sort of brief that we've been given from members is they want to keep it as open and as wide as possible, really. That's just how they operate. They just want to be able to see, you know, see everything. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? If not, then I don't have any more that were submitted in advance, so maybe we can finish a little bit early.
Okay. Well,